Welcome to episode 24 of Armpit Intellectuals. I'm Zara, joined by Bilal as always. And today we're performing an autopsy on the South Asian state's most successful and perhaps most violent occupation, the maternal body. We often talk about quote unquote independence in 1947 as this glorious rupture from British colonial rule. But for women, it was essentially the start of a localized, high-definition surveillance. I've been sitting with Urvashi Butalia's The Other Side of Silence, and I want to dive into the Abducted Persons, Recovery and Restoration Act of 1949. It's arguably the most intellectually repulsive piece of legislation in our shared history. Think about the scene. India and Pakistan, Siamese twins, were in the middle of a divorce so bitter it resulted in the greatest mass migration in human history. They couldn't agree on anything, not water rights, military assets, or even the division of library books. But they reached a perfect, harmonious consensus on one thing: the woman's body. It is the only time Delhi and Karachi have been on the same page, and it was to decide where a woman's so-called purity belongs.
The state decided that national honor was a liquid acid stored in the uterus. The act stipulated that any woman who had been abducted during the partition riots and the state refused to recognize any agency or consent on the part of these women, that these had to be restored to her original religious community. But motherhood isn't a reversible chemical reaction. By 1949, many of these women had birthed children with their abductors or their chosen families. They had built lives within the trauma. They had so called hybrid families. Veena Das argues in Life and Words that state transformed itself into the ultimate kinsman. It basically became a super patriarch, stepping over the individual's will to protect a version of honor that the women themselves often rejected. So, when the traditional family structure collapsed, the state didn't just provide safety, it stepped in to replace the father. It performed a genealogical cleansing. It proved that the modern South Asian state was more interested in cartographic legibility than human survival. If your motherhood didn't fit the need columns of a census, if you were a Muslim woman with a sixth child, the state viewed that child as a biological impurity that threatened the national project.
And the accounts in Butalia's work are genuinely haunting. Social workers describe women being dragged across the border in tears, being forced to leave their infants behind because the governments had agreed that children born of abduction were illegitimate. The state literally ripped the mother from the child to preserve the nation. We built our republics on the forced orphaning of so-called hybrid children. The state's first act of sovereignty was to decide who was allowed to be a mother and which children were allowed to exist in the National Archive.
So, once the state established its right to own the biological mother, it had to create a symbolic mother to justify that ownership. This is the shift from the archive to the icon. We are no longer people, we are mapped territories.
And this is the Bharat Mata versus Madre Millet showdown. In India, you have the icon of Bharat Mata, literally a woman whose body is the map. Her limbs are the borders, her sari is the topography. Tanika Sarkar explores this in Hindu Wife, Hindu Nation. She argues that during the colonial period, the home was the only place Indians felt they had sovereignty. The mother became the queen of this inner sanctum.
But that sovereignty was a gilded cage. Because she was the queen of the home, her body became a site of extreme regulation. The Nationalist Project required her to be a pure mother, to prove that South Asian culture was morally superior to the decadent West. It turned motherhood into a performance of national resistance.
And in Pakistan, it's the archetype of the Madre Millat. The mother is the moral fort. Her job is to socialize the next generation of defenders. As Kamla, Bhasin, and Ritu Menon point out in Borders and Boundaries, the state defined its citizenship through this. To be a citizen wasn't about a passport, it was about which religious community owned your reproductive capacity. And this creates a permanent state of anxious domesticity. The state is like a jealous child. It says, don't mother that boy to be an individual. Mother him to be a soldier of my cause. Don't mother that girl to be autonomous. Mother her to be a vessel of my traditions. This is why the state is so obsessed with what happens in the nursery. They know that if mothers start teaching a history of humanity instead of a history of nations, the whole project collapses in one generation.
Look at the work of Anam Zakaria in The Footprints of Partition. She shows how the state curated curriculum essentially forces mothers to be the primary transmitters of trauma. You are tasked with raising a child who hates the other across the border. The moment a mother refuses this, the moment she teaches empathy or nuance, she becomes a bad subject. She becomes a glitch in the national software that needs to be restored or deleted. Software updated.
And so when we talk about this in academic terms, right? Biopower, sovereignty, genealogy, but we also need to look at what this actually did to the flesh in a physical form. And I was reading Shauna Singh Baldwin's What the Body Remembers, and there is a passage that haunts the entire concept of the Restoration Act. It describes the literal physical deconstruction of the woman to satisfy the symbolic needs of the men around her. So, to quote the excerpt from pages 446 to 447, he lifted the corner of the sheet, took a deep breath, and whipped the sheet away. A woman's body lay beneath, each limb severed at the joint. The body was sliced into 6 parts, then arranged to look as if she were whole again. Her legs, cut neatly at the thigh. Her body was also cut just below the ribs. Her womb had been ripped out. So that scene isn't just describing murder, it's describing annihilation of the future. When Baldwin describes the body being arranged to look as if she were whole again, she is describing the post colonial state. The state takes these shattered, traumatized women, severing their actual bonds to their children and their abductor families, and then rearranges them into the restored citizen to look like the nation is whole again. But the womb is gone. The agency is gone. The woman is a puzzle piece for the state's cartography.
Now let's get into the armpit grit of it. Motherhood in South Asia isn't just policed by the state, it's subcontracted to the Auntie network. This is the informal intelligence agency of the subcontinent. Ta-da-da-da. Every auntie at a dolki is effectively a low level state informant.
And the log kya kahenge, what people say phenomenon, is not just decentralized biopolitics. If your child is at a doctor or a martyr, you've failed the national audit. But the state gets really nasty when mothers refuse to perform this role. Look at the mothers of the disappeared in Balochistan and Kashmir.
This is where the biopolitics gets dark. Biopolitics, a concept popularized by Michel Foucault, describes how political power increasingly manages human life at the population level, focusing on bodies, health, and reproduction to serve state goals shifting power from sovereign right over death to the administration of life itself through public health, census, education, and other policies. The state loves a mother of a martyr, Maya Shaheed. She's a statue. She's a recruiting tool. She's silent, noble, and sacrificial. But the mother of the disappeared, she's an audit. She's a walking, talking failure of the state's social contract. When they protest, the state labels their grief as foreign funded and insincere. They refuse to recognize the maternal bond as a political force unless it's serving the military or the census.
And it's what Veena Das calls the language of pain. The state wants that pain to be private and quiet. The moment it becomes public and loud, it is rebranded as a security threat. We see this even in the diaspora. I mean, look at Netflix's Indian matchmaking or any of these similar shows. Motherhood is portrayed as this desperate project to preserve lineage. Seema Taparia is just a soft power version of the 1949 Recovery Act. Is he from a good family? Is he our religion? It's all the same anxiety. How do we keep the uterus within the border? Now, we have to talk about 2026. We've moved from the physical kidnappings of 1949 to the digital surveillance of the cyber domestic. The state no longer needs a physical officer to recover you because you carry the state's tracking device in your pocket. Ding, ding, ding.
If Butalia's women were silenced by the physical border, modern mothers are silenced by the report button. We've automated the surveillance. Through IDs like Aadhaar and CNIC, motherhood is now a data entry task. But it's the social auditing that's truly armpit. The digital mob has become the state's informal morality police.
It's what you could refer to as algorithmic traditionalism. The state doesn't need to pass a law against bad parenting when they can just let the digital mob do it. We see it in the policing of the westernized mother. If you're a mother who talks about secularism or mental health or autonomy on Instagram, you are labeled a traitor to the heritage. The digital state rewards the religious trad wife performance because the performance produces compliant citizens. Many women are excellent gatekeepers of patriarchy, and many women can be just as violent as patriarchal men.
And the data is being used to prevent the hybridity that the 1949 state feared. Modern surveillance of marriage registries and love jihad laws in India that prohibit religious conversions in marriages are just digital versions of the central recovery operation. They are trying to ensure that no impure lineages are created. It's eugenics with a better user interface.
Think about the national sentiment laws. If you post a photo of your child that doesn't align with the nation state's idea of modesty, then you aren't just a bad parent, you are a cyber criminal. The state has successfully moved the border from the Vaga line into your smartphone. Your inner sanctuary is now a public record available for state audit. But not only that, we ourselves have become the moral police and spectators of people's publicized lives on social media, judging those who choose to share photos of their children without blurring their faces, assuming such mothers do not care for their children's safety and are instead using them to propel their influencer status and monetization opportunities, and so on and so forth. Social media has led to policing and surveillance not only from the state, but from the average audience, the everyday spectator. So, where does this leave us? 79 years after quote unquote independence, it's called partition, by the way. The South Asian mother is arguably under more surveillance than she was under the British. The British wanted your taxes and your labor. The post colonial state wants your soul, your history, and your womb.
The intellectual irony is that our liberation was built on the most intrusive form of regulation. We traded a foreign king for a local super patriarch. The state remains a landlord, and the uterus is the property it refuses to vacate.
If the nation is built on the policing of that property, then freedom is just a metaphor. True independence doesn't start with a flag. It starts with the right of a mother to raise a child who is loyal to humanity before they are loyal to a map, a military, or a nationalist ideology.
We've spent nearly a century building nations out of stolen mothers and curated silences. It's time we stop treating the nursery like a recruitment office.
It's time we realize that the most radical act of motherhood isn't sacrifice, it's sovereignty. Keep your armpits intellectual and your uteruses occupied by no one but yourselves.